Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
Hi there, I'm Julie Musgrave, guest host of Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we talk with CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activision, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Act Software, and many more. I'm very excited because my guest today is Stephanie Sims, the founder of Financeability. If you're looking for tailored advice on how to make your business successful, both financially and personally, she can help you navigate through the process in a way that works best for you. Before we get into the interview, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. If you've been listening for a while, you know how passionate we are about podcasting and content marketing that uplevels your network. We are podcasting evangelists, and for 10 years, we've been saying everyone should start a podcast because even if no one was listening, you will derive tremendous benefits to your life. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It's a tool that accomplishes so much at once. It can and will lead to great clients, referrals, strategic partnerships. It's networking and business development. It's personal and professional development, which doubles as content marketing. We cannot personally help every person to start and run their podcast, but we will try to inspire every person we can reach to do it one way or another because you will love it and tremendous benefit will flow to your life. So to learn more and get some more inspiration and ideas about how you could get clients, referrals, and some of the best friendships of your life from a podcast, go to rise25media.com or email support@rise25media.com. As I mentioned, our guest is Stephanie Sims. Stephanie is an entrepreneur, author, speaker, and podcaster. She carries more than 2 decades worth of experience in finance, quality, and IT management, as well as valuation of public and private entities. Her career started in real estate investment banking, working with Goldman Sachs, CSFB, and Lehman Brothers, just to name a few. Her experience then went international, assisting Swiss startup Microchemical Systems in business development, capital, financial projections, and keeping venture capital investors happy. In 2009, she came back to the U.S. and founded a consulting firm called Rimulu Ventures based out of Arizona. That venture then led to where we are now, the founder of Financeability, a business that helps fellow entrepreneurs navigate their steps from startup to continued success through education and confidence building. Stephanie teaches her clients the tools to expertly evaluate risk versus reward. Cannot wait to hear her inspiring advice. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julie. It's great to be here.
We are so excited. So let's just start from the beginning. Start with the idea behind the concept. What would you say inspired you to start Financeability?
That's a great question. The concept is really that every business owner has the ability to master the financial aspects of their business, even if they don't have an accounting degree, even if they never went to business school. And the heart of that really came from helping my parents sell a business that they owned for over 25 years. 2 super smart people. My dad is a CPA. My mom has experience in lots of different types of transactions, including in the oil and gas industry. Yet when it came time to sell their business, they were so involved in the day-to-day that they really had a hard time kind of lifting their heads and understanding the value of what they were offering. And that experience really is what led me to say, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot more smart people out there who've built great businesses or who want to build one, but they need help with this sort of financial investor mindset piece.
What were some of the things that they felt were holding them back?
So it was really interesting when we first started working together, and I don't know if you've ever worked with family, but like that adds a whole other level.
Whole another level there, yeah.
Exactly. But on the business side, it was, you know things so well, you know things like the back of your hand. You haven't thought of how to sort of package them up in a way that actually makes them attractive. A lot of times you see the warts in what you're doing, and you can't necessarily present it in a way that makes it super exciting to somebody who's just seeing it for the first time.
You want to be able to get people to be as excited as you are about it. And sometimes it's hard to find that language. So you focus a lot on the suits. And speaking of being able to package up your idea and get it to going to someone else, you've probably been that person. You've encountered that person. Do you have any personal experiences with maybe some intimidation or feeling a little bit overwhelmed as you tried to launch anything?
Oh, and this is something that every founder, every entrepreneur has experienced at one time or another. This kind of power dynamic, right? Oh, I have to go ask this person for money. And some people have it around clients. Some people have it around funding, right? Whether it's talking to your banker or trying to talk to an angel investor or even a venture capitalist. And then some people have it around their partners, right? Like strategic partnerships. And one of the things that I've found that's always really helpful for me is if you try to think about the conversation as looking for a fit. So instead of thinking, I'm going to go ask this person for money and they might say no, it's more, I have an exciting opportunity for the person, and I just want to see if they're a fit for me as much as I'm seeing if they're a fit, if I'm a fit for them.
I can understand that kind of pressure. You want everyone to say yes to you. And so you're afraid of maybe saying no to someone else, but it is super important to find the right fit. Don't settle.
Exactly. And I think sometimes what we do, and I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs do this as well, is they're so excited that somebody finally said yes, that they end up taking a transaction or a partnership arrangement that's just not a good fit for them. And so that's where doing a little bit of pre-work and really understanding the value you provide and having maybe some lines in the sand can help you get into that situation and be able to say, you know what, this isn't a fit for me. I see that you're super excited, but here's what I need to make this work for me.
You mentioned before the fact that you should really know your worth. I think a lot of people may not realize what they have to give out there, at least externally. Any advice for how to maybe learn that about yourself as a business owner?
I think that's a great question. And some of it depends on the kind of business you're in, right? So sometimes in a product business, it can be easier to kind of know your worth because you're building a thing, right? You've got this thing and you know how much it costs. But in service businesses, I particularly find people struggle with this because sometimes they're putting a value on their own time, and that feels really strange. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is really look at the problem that you're solving for the person that you're helping. And quite often, if you look at the value through their eyes, it makes it easier for you to understand what you're providing instead of it being all about, well, I don't know if I want to charge X per hour.
Yeah. And you deserve to be able to charge what you are worth. So part of your business model, I saw, involves a sort of quiz that you want business owners to sit through and answer these questions. How did you determine the content there, and why are those the questions that we should be asking ourselves as we launch whatever it is that we're trying to get going?
Thank you already for looking at the quiz. We did invest a lot of time into putting that together. Those questions come from my investment banking background, and those are the questions that investors or bankers are going to be asking you. And so the way the quiz is designed is it's really there to help you understand where you're a best fit so that you're not wasting time chasing money that's just not a good fit for you. I know we hear a lot in the popular press about everybody needs to raise an angel round or everybody needs venture capital. And the truth is that less than 1% of businesses are really right for that kind of funding. And so if you can just take that off the table and not even have to worry about that, to me, that's a really freeing place to be, because you don't have to go through all that rigmarole. You're going to focus on a different type of funding for your business.
I think that's just one burden that's lifted, because funding can be sometimes the most stressful part.
Exactly.
And speaking of funding, you do help people find the cash, as you say. So what is your best advice for those first steps, maybe encountering some roadblocks along the way, moving on from hearing the word no?
So I think first off, prepare yourself, right? Because everyone's not going to be a fit, and you only want the people who are going to be a true partner to you. So don't expect everyone to say yes. And despite what you hear that you have to talk to 200 people or 500 people or whatever, I think it's good to have a list of folks that you feel would be a fit, and then to take that list systematically and refine the list as you talk to more people. Because if you're learning from each of those conversations, ultimately you're just getting closer to the person who's going to say yes. But you have to listen to what the folks who are saying no, listen to those objections, and be able to integrate them into the way that you're talking about your opportunity. Otherwise, you're going to keep hearing no because you haven't really adapted to the way that you're talking about things.
And probably when you do hear no, there's a sense of learning, growing from that, and maybe finding out why they said no, and then being able to build on that.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of people, when they hear the no, are so they had such high expectations, right? They were like, this is going to work. It's going to work this time, that they can't in that moment ask those questions, right? You know, which part of this particular opportunity was not attractive to you? But if you can practice hearing no so that it's not that shock when you get it, and stay in the conversation to ask exactly the questions you were talking about, that makes a huge difference, not only because you'll learn from it, but also because so few people do it, that the person you're talking to is going to remember you. And if you do come back to them, say in 6 months, because you needed more traction or more clients or whatever, they're going to remember, hey, this is somebody who had a very high level of self-awareness and capacity to integrate the feedback that I gave them.
I think that's an interesting point too, is that even if you hear no from someone one time, that doesn't mean that you can't go back to them again and try again.
Exactly. And that's where knowing why they said no can be really helpful. Because if they say, no, we don't invest in that type of business, or, you know, perhaps it's a bank and they say, no, we can't make loans against this particular type of business. That's a no. You can keep them informed, but probably nothing is going to happen there. However, if it's someone who says, well, this is really great, but we can't invest in you because you haven't been in business long enough, or we need you to achieve a certain level of revenue first, that's a perfect target to stay in touch with, and to reach out to them, say 3 months from the first meeting, and say, hey, just wanted to let you know that we're on track to hit the target that you set for us in 6 months, a year. Would it be good if we came back and had another conversation?
And I'm sure that just shows great faith and builds that trust early on. All this kind of parlays into strengths and weaknesses. So what's your best advice to play up what our strengths are, and also maybe learn from those weaknesses that we come across?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the places I see entrepreneurs struggle a lot is identifying their strengths and their weaknesses to start with. And it depends, maybe it's a generational thing, but, you know, some of us were taught that if somebody asks your weaknesses, like in a job interview, you're supposed to say, oh, I work too hard. You know, you're supposed to take all your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. It can always
be a positive, right?
Right.
I'm too devoted.
Right, exactly. And while I think if it's true, you shouldn't make up a weakness, I do think that it's very important to acknowledge places where you do need assistance, because that can also be an opportunity for the person you're talking to help you. So say that you have a tech business and you're having trouble finding talent, right? Which up until recently was the case because the market was so tight. If you just say, we'd like to grow our dev team, but we're having trouble finding talent, that's part of the reason that we can't move as quickly as we'd like to. Perhaps the person you're talking to is like, oh, I have a brother-in-law, or I have a friend who's a recruiter, or I happen to know somebody who just reached out to me, and they could make that connection for you. So I would talk about what you're good at, but I wouldn't hesitate to talk about where you might need help, because quite often that can be another connection point and another way somebody could actually help you and build that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know where the next connection is lying around the corner. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk just about balance, because I know there is that feeling of overwhelm when you are trying to launch something, and maybe you have a family. I know you've got 3 kids, you're a wife, so you got to figure it all out. You want to be happy financially, but also personally. So what's your best advice for managing all that?
I don't care who tells you they've got it all together. They don't. So
They're lying.
Well, they're not lying, but point number one, nobody actually has it all together. Nobody actually has it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
And so even these, even the amazing role models, and there are a lot, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of women that I admire, folks like Kate Northrup, folks like Sarah Blakely, lots of other folks that are maybe less well known who do a great job living, work-life balance. But I also think that you have to be realistic with yourself, and you have to understand, hey, I'm not going to be perfect on any given day, but I need to set my own barometer, if you will, that's going to help me make sure that over a week or a month, I'm taking care of the family and of my business in a way that really makes me feel good about what I'm doing. I think that it's always a challenge when you feel like you're pulled in both directions. But if you can actually say, I'm going to concentrate 100% on this particular project, and then I'm going to take a long weekend and spend it with my family, sometimes that helps you be more present in both cases than if you're like, well, I'm going to work on this project for 25 minutes, and then I'm going to go do this with my family, and then I'm going to come back. So it's about knowing yourself, but it's also about really checking in to make sure that you're moving towards the goals that you want to achieve in both areas, right?
I like it. I like it that you're recognizing that each day is a new day. You can put into it however the puzzle pieces fit, right? Is there anything that you wish that you'd done differently?
I laugh, and it's not that I would have done it differently. I think there's all kinds of amazing things that happen, and I think I wish I knew then what I know now, right? But everybody does. I wish that I had been less focused on impressing other people and worrying about what some of the folks that I worked with thought, and maybe a little bit more willing to speak my mind. But some of that's youth, right? And some of that's experience. And I think you can only go forward from where you are. And the truth is, I wouldn't trade anything, because then I would be somewhere else. And I really like where I am.
It's a good spot. I would say that. Let's talk a little timely issue. Of course, everyone's dealing with coronavirus. Maybe someone just launched a business before all this happened. Maybe they were in the middle of trying to get that business launched. What advice do you have for moving forward once all of this finally gets settled?
That's a great question. And the first thing I would say is that you're not alone. There are plenty of folks who I've worked with personally who were in industries that have been terribly hard hit. People in food and beverage, specifically people in retail, who had great ideas and were getting a lot of traction prior to COVID. I've been incredibly impressed with the way that some of those folks have pivoted. So they've basically said, what can I do with my technology that would allow me to serve folks during this period, but preserve my ability to go back to my original business model later? And then there's some folks who've decided, you know what, some of them, it was a side hustle, right? They were about to quit their job and move into the business full time. Obviously, most of those have decided, I'm going to stick with my job and I'll move to the side hustle a bit later. And I think there are some folks who maybe have been thinking about it, and perhaps they're deciding now, this isn't the business of my dreams, right? They're looking at it and they're asking themselves the question, do I want to take on this much risk? And so I guess my biggest piece of advice would be to try to understand what feels like the best fit for you. And just because you had committed to something, if this has made you rethink that, don't feel like a failure if you choose to keep it a side hustle or you choose not to pursue it. Maybe this is the opportunity you needed to recognize that there's something better that could come from that experience, but it doesn't have to be that business or that idea.
Yeah, It's so hard to kind of manage those expectations because January 1st of 2020, we had no idea. And let's say that someone decides that they do want to stick with it. How do we move forward? I know there's some stimulus programs, and how do we manage this in a positive way?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of folks are early days, right? So say 6 weeks ago, when we weren't really sure how long this was going to last, and we're still not sure, but maybe we have a little bit better idea now.
Right.
I think there were a lot of people who were sort of holding their breath, figuratively. They were like, well, I just have to survive the next 4 weeks. And I'm hopeful that most people have kind of recognized that it's not about just surviving through the end of stay at home or shelter in place. It's about really rethinking your business model and understanding if it's a fit for the way that things will be in this new era. Again, there's some industries that are significantly more affected than others, retail, food and beverage, anything with an in-person component. I think one of the best things you can do is not just try to understand what you have to do legally, right, to be able to reopen, but to really understand how you could serve your customers better in this new environment. Like, what are your customers going to be asking themselves? What are they going to be worried about? And is there an opportunity there to leverage what you've already built to be, to position yourself differently, to put yourself at the forefront of folks who really want to help their customers and also grow their business?
I like your use of the word pivot earlier, just it's almost kind of forcing business owners and entrepreneurs to really get creative and maybe this can escalate their ideas that they hadn't even realized before. So there's a positive. We could take that.
Yeah, well, and I don't remember, I think it's Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, it's amazing how creative you can be when you don't have any other choice. And while I certainly have a ton of sympathy for anyone who's been impacted by COVID, I do think it's going to help a lot of folks move to a very different level. And we're going to see a lot of innovation coming out of this.
I know you've discussed before this feeling of you have to know all the answers to every question that's going to get thrown your way. And I think that's especially important right now in this atmosphere. We don't know all of the answers, but I think a lot of us probably picture an episode of Shark Tank where they're all asking you, well, what's the answer to this? And if you don't know it, then they walk away. And that can be so intimidating. So how should you go about it instead? You say that you don't necessarily have to know all the answers.
Exactly. And I think that there's a balance to strike there, right? You need to be prepared. And so a lot of that preparation can come from having a very good understanding of your business and metrics, right? How you measure success inside your own business. But I think once you've done that preparation, I think there's this aspect of being open as opposed to seeing a question from left field as an attack. Maybe it's also a little bit of reframing around how do you perceive that as an opportunity, right? So if somebody asks you a question, and again, people can be jerks. I'm not saying that they're always going to be nice in the way they ask the question. Why didn't you think about whatever?
It's a learning moment.
Exactly. But I do think that if somebody asks a question that just hadn't occurred to you, it's always better to say, I don't know. And I will find out. Here's my initial reaction to that. Because sometimes people will ask a question that may not apply or that shows that they haven't understood what you've already explained to them. And it's an opportunity to say, it sounds like there might be a misunderstanding. Let me clear that up. But if you don't know the answer, I think you need to commit to finding it. But trying to pretend that you know something you don't just makes you look silly and frankly kills any credibility you'd built up until that point.
Yeah. That reminds me to go back to pivot. You just figure it out. You figure it out on your way there. Let's end with a personal thing. Who do you credit most for getting where you are today?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think it's got to be my family. First my parents, who not only obviously supported me as I traveled all around the world and decided I didn't want to just stay in Texas, but also for trusting me to help them with their business when they were ready to sell. Now it's my husband and my kids as well, who give me the freedom to work from home and don't, as my kids say, they're all in online school right now. And quite often I'm like, okay, I'm about to get on a call. Everybody get offline. They laugh about it, but they put up with me. They're like, we know that look. We know that I'm about to get on video look. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just knowing that I have that support that's been really, really instrumental in helping me push myself and try things that I probably would never have tried if I didn't feel like I had that backing me up.
Support is, I think, something that we can all rely on right now and that we all need, especially during this time. But we certainly appreciate your advice, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving such great advice. I think we can all relate in so many ways. Stephanie, where can folks find you?
If they'd like to reach out to me, the best place is on LinkedIn. I'm Stephanie J. Sims on LinkedIn. Or if they want to find out more about all the different things I'm up to, they can go to stephaniesims.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You bet. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.